What if the family you created, the love you chose, and the life you loved were called a crime? That is what kind of storm Kody Brown, the star of TLC's Sister Wives, stepped into, a storm that pulled him from his living room to straight to the courtroom. Imagine you live in a world where your love, the family you build, and the joy you share are illegal. Picture smiling into the camera, while being aware that, in the background, the law might dismember your family. This wasn't a film, or an imaginary TV show. This was reality for Kody Brown and his family. Since Sister Wives premiered on TLC in 2010, the show has been hooked from the very beginning. Millions of viewers watched as they got to experience a lifestyle few had ever seen so publicly before. Polygamy. Kody Brown introduced us to his wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin, and their dozens of children in the premiere episode. It was a large, dysfunctional family household that shared one home in Lehi, Utah. To some, it was intriguing. To others, it was shocking, even controversial. But one thing was certain: Kody and his wives were no longer hiding. For the first time in television history, a plural marriage family was throwing open the doors, welcoming cameras into their day-to-day lives. They prepared meals together, celebrated birthdays, navigated jealousies, and discussed candidly the difficulties of sharing one husband. But what appeared to be just another reality program turned into something far more sinister. In bringing cameras into the home, the Browns had also opened themselves up to something else: examination. And on screen, Kody appeared as a playful, sometimes overwhelmed father of nearly 24 children. He was shown driving a sports car, running from house to house, and laughing with his wives. But off-screen, a storm was brewing. Law enforcement in Utah was watching. Polygamy had been illegal in the state for over a century, tied to a long and controversial history with the Mormon Church. Although Kody and his family were frank about their way of life, the state deemed it illegal. According to Utah law, bigamy, being married to multiple individuals simultaneously, was a crime punishable by time behind bars. Now, the Brown family's reality show was more than just entertainment. It was proof. Picture the burden of that awareness. Each time the Browns sat down for a family meal, each time Kody walked hand in hand with two wives in front of television cameras, they were exposing themselves to danger as well. What viewers witnessed as lovely, prosecutors might witness as damning. Kody used to tell interviewers in numerous interviews that his priorities were his children. He hoped they would have a good home and values growing up. Now, however, the basis of that home was threatened. If the state did pursue charges, Kody might find himself in jail. Worse, Child Protective Services might get involved. Consider this: more than a dozen children, all of a sudden possibly to be uprooted from their parents, because of whom their father decided to marry. For Kody, it was not about his liberty. It was about the survival of his family. The Browns started living in a bizarre double reality. On the one hand, they were TV stars, signing deals and shooting episodes. On the other hand, they were fugitives at home, holding their breath for that knock on the door that might transform everything. As the show became more popular, so did the controversy surrounding it. There were those who defended the Browns and said that consenting adults ought to be able to live as they desire. Others attacked them, labeling polygamy as immoral or risky. The news media agonized endlessly. Was this an out-of-the-way family being eccentric, or were they criminals airing their lifestyle on television nationwide? For Kody, each headline added another level of stress. He wasn't only defending himself on his own property, he was defending himself in the court of public opinion. And that courtroom was just as unforgiving, if not more so, than any judge he would ever have to answer to. During the months following the show's debut, Utah officials quietly launched a probe into the clan. It wasn't just gossip anymore, the law was on their doorstep. The Browns didn't put it on the show, but off-camera, attorneys were already being sought out. Kody and his wives were forced to wonder, should they continue filming, in the knowledge that it might be turned against them? It was yes. They decided to keep pushing forward, thinking that being open and honest with the world was stronger than cowering in silence. But it had a price. The threats from the law grew more vocal. There were rumors of indictments, of jail time, of their family being broken apart. And yet, through it all, The Browns kept smiling on camera, determined to show the world that their love was real, even if the law said it wasn't. By the conclusion of that initial season, viewers were enthralled not just by the drama of the Brown family, but also by the impending suspense. What would they do next? Would the state of Utah indeed prosecute Kody Brown for bigamy? Would the family be torn asunder on national television? This wasn't a reality show any longer. This was a tale of freedom, religion, and conflict between the individual right to make choices and government. To the Browns, the courtroom wasn't an option, it was a looming reality. And as the glare increased, so did the shadows of the ensuing legal wars. All families have secrets. But for Kody Brown, his so-called secret was not secret at all, on national television. And while millions of viewers waited with bated breath, there was somebody else watching with an eye infinitely sharper: the law. In order to figure out why Kody Brown's family was under threat, we have to take the clock back a little. There is a long and contentious past between Utah and polygamy. It was practiced in the early Mormon Church, but was given up officially in the late 1800s, when the church came under pressure from the U.S. government. Since then, the state of Utah has enforced it very hard. By the time Sister Wives hit airwaves in 2010, Utah's anti-polygamy statutes remained among the most severe in the United States. Bigamy, having two or more spouses at one time, was a felony charge, with potential jail time on the line. Even worse, merely cohabiting with two or more partners, while presenting yourself as married, might land you in hot water. To put it another way, Kody and his wives didn't require marriage licenses to be charged with a crime. Simply living openly as a plural family was sufficient. This required the Browns not merely to be on a television show. They were, in effect, living proof in a court case, and prosecutors were aware of this. As the shows aired, local police couldn't help but notice the attention being focused on Lehi, Utah. There was a man, proudly declaring on television that he had 4 wives. It was a brazen defiance of the very laws Utah had sworn to enforce. Picture the stress within the Brown family those days. Kody would take off to get groceries or take the kids to school, and lurking in the back of his mind was this chilling question: am I being watched? Christine or Janelle would venture outside and see strange cars parked around the block. Even if they were neighbors' cars, fear still lingered. The family wasn't paranoid. Investigators actually were surveilling them. The Utah County Attorney's Office later confirmed in reports that they had initiated an official investigation of the Browns, seeking evidence on which to bring charges of felony bigamy. For the majority of individuals, reality television brings money and celebrity. For the Browns, it brought the frightening prospect of prison bars. The Browns attempted to maintain normality for their children. Birthdays were still celebrated, meals were eaten, and family gatherings continued. But behind the scenes, fear was in charge of all things. Picture the older kids hearing hushed conversations between their parents. What if they take Dad away? What if they split us up? Although Kody and his wives attempted to keep the kids in the dark about the whole situation, kids are intelligent. They sensed the tension between the adults. For Kody, the stakes were overwhelming. He wasn't only the husband of 4 wives, he was the father of more than a dozen children. All his choices now had tremendous implications. If he got locked up, what would become of them? If the state broke up the family, would the kids hold him responsible for putting them on television? Behind the smiles that appeared on Sister Wives, these were the questions tormenting him every single evening. Outside the Brown family, arguments raged. Some viewed the Browns as courageous for exposing their lifestyle. Others criticized them for sensationalizing an illegal activity. Religious officials, legal scholars, and average Americans all weighed in. News networks broadcast special reports. Is polygamy okay? Are the Browns heroes or criminals? Internet forums were abuzz with debate. While some defended the family, claiming that loving relationships between consenting adults should not be criminalized, others expressed concern regarding the abuse inherent in polygamous relationships, citing shadowy tales of secluded communities. For Kody, it was a nightmare. He had hoped that the show would make his family more relatable, and that people would be able to learn more about polygamy. It was instead trying his family in the court of public opinion, before he even set foot in a real courtroom. In 2010, Only a few weeks after the debut of the show, the Utah County Attorney's Office confirmed it had initiated a criminal investigation into the Browns. To the family, this was not just news. This was a bombshell. The statement made prosecutors seriously consider charges. Convicted on felony bigamy, Kody would land in prison for years. Each wife would also be charged with aiding and abetting. And the kicker? Their children might be removed from them by the state on grounds of protecting them. Consider the terror of hearing those words as a parent, safeguarding them. For the Browns, their children were secure, loved, and nurtured. Yet, to the law, the very nature of their household was deemed a threat. On Sister Wives, fans witnessed tension among the wives, discussions of jealousy, and navigating a massive household. What fans didn't witness was the chaos in the background. Producers did not capture the legal crisis on camera, but the Browns couldn't avoid it in real life. Kody started seeking advice from lawyers, inquiring whether they should discontinue filming or even relocate out of Utah altogether. The wives discussed whether they would keep displaying their faces on television. Occasionally tension spilled over, fights erupted, tears were shed, and sleepless nights accumulated. But amid all this, the cameras continued to roll. The Browns made a decision to share their narrative regardless of the price tag. By season 1's conclusion, the Browns knew the circumstances were unsustainable. Remaining in Utah was living with the risk of being prosecuted. Each day was a risk. At any time, Kody might be arrested, and the family separated. It was then that the Browns made one of the most dramatic choices of their lives. They would leave Utah. They would uproot, move to Las Vegas, and attempt to create a new life in a state where polygamy wasn't prosecuted as aggressively. But even as they began to make plans to leave, one question hung in the air. Would Utah prosecutors hit them before they could flee? The Browns departed Utah, but the specter of the law was with them. The investigation didn't go away, nor did the shame. They would even be labeled as that polygamous family from television in Nevada. And though departing provided them with respite, it also prepared them for something much larger. A battle in the courts, which would lead them directly to federal court, where they would appeal Utah's laws themselves. The Browns had become from reality TV celebrities to legal trailblazers, not just fighting for their own household, but for the liberty of all plural households in America. Running can only get you so far. For Kody Brown and his household, fleeing Utah was merely the start. Because when the law looms over your own existence, there is a time when concealment isn't an option anymore. You must battle back. In 2011, the Brown family relocated from their lives and made Las Vegas, Nevada, home. It was a huge adjustment. New homes, new schools for the children, and an opportunity to take a breath without having to look over their shoulders all the time. Las Vegas was a city in which anything was possible. And for the Browns, it was not just neon lights and casinos. It was freedom, or as close to freedom as they could get. Nevada didn't actively seek out polygamous families like Utah, but the Browns were well aware they weren't completely in the clear. Their faces were already familiar across the country, and Utah's laws still hovered over them like an open promise. Kody, though, was not the sort of fellow to sit back and wish the issue would resolve itself. Relocation relieved him, but it clarified things. It was time to fight the very system that had driven his family out of Utah. While cameras were still rolling for Sister Wives, the Browns issued a drastic declaration. They weren't going to flee the law anymore. Instead, they were going to fight it head-on. In 2011, Kody and his 4 wives sued Utah's anti-polygamy law. Their message was concise but compelling. The law infringed on their constitutional rights. Adults ought to be able to choose their relations, their marriages, their families without government interference. This wasn't all about Kody anymore. It wasn't even all about Sister Wives. It was about all plural families who had ever lived in fear of being taken away from their children, their homes, or their freedom, due to laws penned over 100 years ago. The case was legally known as Brown vs. Bowman, after Utah County Attorney Jeff Bowman, who had conducted the probe against the family. In an instant, overnight. In fact, the Browns became reality TV sensations and legal trailblazers. The moment the suit was filed, the press leapt at it. Headlines blared. Sister Wives challenged the state of Utah. Lawyers discussed the case in front of TV cameras. Could this family actually bring down laws that were decades old? The Browns gave interviews, talking about their cause with fervor. Kody, typically characterized as a prankster or a drama king on TV, now spoke like a man on a crusade. His wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin, accompanied him, each of them drawing attention to the fact that their lifestyle was rooted in faith, love, and choice, not coercion. The more they talked, the more the public perceived the Browns in a new light. They weren't criminals lurking in the dark. They were a family seeking justice. The Browns case came down to a single pivotal question. Do adult consenting adults have a right to cohabit in plural marriages without punishment by the state? They cited the U.S. Constitution. The First Amendment ensures religious freedom. The 14th Amendment guarantees protection under the law equally. These points, collectively, were the essence of the case. For the Browns, it wasn't about legal rights. It was about dignity. They didn't want their children to grow up fearful, ashamed, and told their family was a crime. But not everyone agreed. Utah prosecutors argued that the state had every right to outlaw polygamy. They pointed to cases of abuse in certain polygamous communities, where women and children had been exploited. To them, the law wasn't just about morality, it was about protection. This was one of the greatest challenges to the Browns. They needed to distance themselves from the sordid tales of polygamy, forced marriage, underage brides, and cult-like leaders that so frequently made the headlines. They needed to show that their family was different, loving, consensual, and based on personal choice. The courtroom was the arena for this war of narratives. Prosecutors on one side portrayed polygamy as a perilous practice. The Browns, on the other side, portrayed it as a personal choice. The hearings for Brown v. Boomin generated national attention. Journalists packed the courthouse, waiting for word. Legal scholars picked apart each motion and each decision. Inside, the Browns heard lawyers argue their very right to be a family. Sitting in a courtroom and hearing others dispute the life you've created, the love you have, and the children you've raised should be illegal. For Kody and his wives, it was bizarre and intimate. At times, the stress flared. Christine, the effervescent personality on camera, revealed moments of exasperation in the battle with the law. Janelle, normally serene and steadfast, confessed to losing sleep. But as a team, they kept going, determined to bring the case to its conclusion. Aside from the court fight, the Browns had become symbolic. To plural families nationwide, they were heroes, individuals who had the courage to resist a system that had forced them into concealment for generations. For opponents, though, the Browns were risky, leveraging their celebrity to legalize something they believed would be detrimental. The controversy intensified. But one thing was definite. The Browns had compelled America to discuss polygamy like it hadn't in decades. Suits take time. They drag along for years, with filings and hearings and mountains of paperwork. For the Browns, each new development was a roller coaster of hope and fear. There were times when victory seemed possible, and times when the case appeared destined to fail. Throughout, the cameras continued rolling, catching not only the family's personal drama, but also their historic legal battle. The children continued to mature in those years, becoming increasingly conscious of what their parents were battling for. Some were openly supportive of the fight, while others grappled with the attention it generated. For the Brown children, it wasn't merely a lawsuit, it was childhood. As the case picked up momentum, something amazing occurred. Other plural families started talking. Emboldened by the Browns, they too cried out for change. For decades, they had lived in secret, fearing discovery, but now, with Sister Wives on television and Brown v. Boomin making headlines, silence no longer seemed like the only alternative. The Browns had begun a revolution. Whether they intended to or not, by suing, the Browns had altered their narrative. They were no longer simply that polygamous family from TLC. They were plaintiffs in a historic case that could redefine the future of marriage laws in America. It was a metamorphosis few reality television stars ever get to undergo. What began as a television experiment had become a struggle for constitutional liberties. And as the case progressed, the world waited to find out, would Kody Brown and his wives really make history? Every courtroom fight has a victor, But what if your victory is stripped away from you before you can even enjoy it? For Kody Brown and his brood, the battle against Utah's anti-polygamy statute led them to the ultimate peak of hope, and then shattered it with the bleak force of legalities. By 2012, the Browns had been residing in Las Vegas for a year. The Brown v. Pullman lawsuit, which they had filed, was plodding through the justice system. For the family, each court hearing was like a milestone. Would this be the day when they finally received protection, or would the law shut the door on their aspirations? Court proceedings are slow, and the Browns discovered patience the hard way. Attorneys entered motion after motion, prosecutors responded, and judges sifted through piles of arguments. Meanwhile, the family continued to produce Sister Wives. To the outside world, they seemed to be doing well in their new Nevada homes. But off-camera, every action they took, every step, every utterance was overshadowed by the lawsuit. The stakes were enormous. If they prevailed, Utah's anti-polygamy statute might be diluted or eliminated altogether. If they lost, they would end up where they began. Outlaws in the eyes of the state. In December 2013, after 3 years of waiting, the Browns finally received their answer. Judge Clark Waddups of the U.S. District Court in Utah issued a ruling that shook the country. He struck down a key part of Utah's anti-polygamy law. Specifically, the court ruled that it was unconstitutional for Utah to criminalize married people who cohabited with others as if they were spouses. In layman's terms, what that meant was Kody could not on paper lawfully wed more than one wife, but the state could no longer punish him for being with his wives and labeling them as his family. It was a sweeping victory. For the first time in recent history, a federal court had ruled in favor of a polygamous family and asserted, "You have a right to live this way without fear of prosecution." Media outlets burst with headlines. Sister Wives family wins polygamy case. Legal experts argued over whether this might pave the way for greater plural marriage acceptance. The Browns' supporters welcomed the news, hailing it as a victory for individual freedom. And within the Brown family, there was celebration. Kody addressed the ruling proudly, stating it was a victory not only for his family, but for every plural family who had existed in fear for generations. For a few months, life was different. The Browns could finally relax. They no longer lived in fear of being fugitives. They had transpired from being probed by Utah prosecutors to being supported by a federal court. For the wives, the ruling meant security. Christine said she finally felt that her children wouldn't grow up with the fear of their father being taken away. Janelle spoke about the relief of knowing they could go home to Utah to visit family without constantly worrying about being followed or arrested. The decision was also symbolically significant. Polygamy in America had long been shrouded in secrecy, linked to secrecy and suspicion. Now, thanks to the Browns, a federal judge had ruled that adults in plural marriages were entitled to protection under the Constitution. It seemed history had changed. Victory, particularly in contentious cases, never occurs without costs, however. The ruling's opponents acted swiftly. Utah authorities had maintained that the ruling would expose the state to a flood of abuse. They cautioned against polygamous cults coercing women into marriages and children into dangerous situations. Opponents criticized the Browns for exploiting their celebrity to popularize a practice that might be damaging. In the press, arguments flared again. Freedom advocates hailed it as a victory for freedom. Freedom haters decried it as a perilous step backward. The Browns found themselves once more at the center of a national tempest, their lives picked apart on talk shows, news shows, and the internet. And then came the final blow. Utah appealed the decision. Legal fights are marathons. They don't finish with one decision. In 2016, a decision was finally made by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals after a lengthy string of hearings and appeals. The Browns' win was overturned by the court, but here's the surprising twist. The judges did not directly rule on polygamy. They instead dismissed the suit on a technical argument, stating that the Browns did not have standing. Why? Because Utah prosecutors had assured them that they would not prosecute the Browns for polygamy. Since there was no immediate threat of prosecution, the judges claimed the Browns had no basis for a suit. It was a crushing blow. The family hadn't lost due to their arguments being incorrect, but because the court asserted that they didn't even have the right to present those arguments. In a single stroke, the Browns' victory in the courts disappeared. The reversal was devastating for Kody and his wives. Picture fighting for years, rejoicing over a historic win, only to be undone on the back of legalities. Christine, who had spoken so candidly about feeling relieved, acknowledged that she felt betrayed. Mary called it a kick in the stomach. Janelle, normally the pragmatic one, said it was devastating to consider all the time, money and effort that had been invested in the case, only for it to be dismissed. And what about Kody? He was angry. To him, the system had deceived. He felt that Utah prosecutors had knowingly agreed not to charge them just to let the case die. In his perspective, it was evidence that the state never sought justice. It simply wanted to shut up the discussion. The public was also split. Some were outraged the win had been taken away. Others felt justified, claiming the Browns never should have won to begin with. Legal experts said that the ruling did not make polygamy legal once more, just reinstated the prosecution power of the state. In principle, Utah could pursue plural families again at any time it wanted to. This put the Browns in an odd limbo. They were legally safe, but only because prosecutors deemed so. Their liberty was not secured by law. It was up to the benevolence of officials who had previously investigated them. Even with the defeat, the Browns had achieved something significant. Their lawsuit had made America address the problem of polygamy in a manner that it hadn't seen in decades. For years, the term had been linked to secrecy, cults, and abuse. Today, thanks to Sister Wives and the lawsuit, millions witnessed a different image. A family that appeared in every sense just like any other. Although their triumph was reversed, the Browns had ignited a nationwide debate regarding love, liberty, and the boundaries of official authority. And for plural families nationwide, that debate alone was a step in the right direction. By late 2016, the Browns were right where they had begun, living as a plural family under an aura of uncertainty. Their courtroom win had been taken away, their case dismissed, and their future uncertain. But something had forever altered. The Browns were no longer merely reality television personalities. They were trailblazers who had crossed the boundaries by challenging the system, even though the system succeeded in silencing them. For Kody Brown, the battle was never really over. Despite the setback, he felt their case had set the stage for future battles. He never ceased to say that history was on their side, that eventually love would prevail, even though it might not be during his time. The Brown-Vossman story concluded not with a bang but with a technical dismissal. But for the Browns, the battle had transformed everything. They had known victory, had known freedom, and had known devastating defeat, all within the brief space of just a few years. And though the law had sent them back into the shadows, the family knew one thing. Once a door to freedom is opened a crack, it can never be closed again. Every courtroom battle eventually comes to an end. But what happens when the fight isn't just about laws? It's about love, freedom, and the right to live without fear. For Kody Brown and his family, the verdict wasn't just a legal one. It was a turning point that shaped their legacy forever. After years of doubt, the courtroom doors finally provided an answer. The Browns' legal battle was about one thing: should the state have authority to criminalize their way of life, even if it was not harming anyone? The court accepted reality. The family had understood all along that criminalizing consenting adults for their own choices offended basic freedoms. While the legal fight was lengthy and riddled with setbacks, the Browns did something few thought possible. They eroded laws that had relegated families like theirs to the margins. But it wasn't a fairy tale win. Polygamy didn't all at once become admired or universally accepted. Rather, the Browns discovered that freedom sometimes manifests itself in pieces. They weren't in handcuffs, but they weren't completely welcomed by society either. What started out as fear became a crusade. Kody and the wives changed from reality television celebrities to spokespeople. Every interview, every book contract, and every public outing became a chance to stand up for their family, both from gossip, but also from the shame of being called criminals. Christine frequently talked about the fatigue of living in secret, and how the show empowered her to say, "This is who we are." Janelle, being more pragmatic, discussed the financial and emotional toll the family had to shoulder as they battled court cases. Mary spoke to the sadness of being made to feel as though her love didn't count. And Robin, the newest bride, was a symbol of strength, entering the family in the midst of turmoil but not leaving. Their voices, once shaking with fear, now filled with power. They were no longer simply recounting their story, they were rewriting it for polygamous families nationwide. But with that came a cost. The program that had provided them with exposure also amplified their conflicts. Every argument, every money problem, and every personal decision was broadcast before millions. The courtroom victory did not insulate them from the bright spotlight of reality television. Fans who had cheered them before now looked for every misstep. Were they really all together? Were cracks appearing in the foundation of their family? The Browns had conquered the courtroom, but the war for peace and privacy was only just beginning. And yet, that tension held viewers on the edge of their seats. The Browns were not just a family anymore. Now, they represented resilience, controversy, and the messy, complicated glory of standing for what you stand for. As the seasons passed of Sister Wives, it was revealed that the family was not exempt from change. Christine did ultimately decide to leave, severing ties with the plural marriage she had once promoted. Mary also wrestled with her position in the family, spending much time alone. Even Janelle, who had always been the peacemaker, started questioning if it was worth it. Kody, once the self-assured heart of the family, now found himself struggling with faction and uncertainty. The man who had stood in the courtroom and confronted the law now confronted something even more difficult: losing the integrity of the family that he had put everything on the line to defend. And yet, this too was part of their legacy. Because the Browns' tale was not merely one of winning or losing in court. It was one of the fact that love is messy, families change, and sometimes the wars within the walls are as bitter as the ones without. So what is Kody Brown's and his courtroom drama's legacy? It's the photo of a family risking being found when it would have been simpler to remain concealed. It's the bravery of parents who gambled everything to protect their children. It's the imperfect, messy, yet decidedly human tale of individuals opting for love when the world instructed them otherwise. The Browns didn't ride off into the sunset as heroes to everyone. They didn't repeal every law or quiet every critic. But they did something stronger. They initiated a conversation that had been underground for generations. Today, whether you approve of their lifestyle or not, you can't help but acknowledge the effect they've had. They took their personal battle and made it a public issue, and their courthouse fears and turned them into a lasting reminder that freedom isn't about laws. It's about being brave enough to live truthfully. At the end of each season of Sister Wives, one thing is certain: the Browns saga is hardly over. The courtroom antics were only a single chapter in a saga that continues to be written. Love, loss, faith, and family continue to challenge them, but their legacy is already cemented. They will always stand in the annals of history as the family who stood before cameras and judges alike, and proclaimed, "This is who we are. This is our choice. And no law, no opinion will take that away from us." And perhaps, only perhaps, that's the greatest triumph of all.